Hi, so yeah, my name's Hayley Harrison. I'm a multidisciplinary visual artist. I work with abandoned materials, human and non-human materials. So in the past, I've used crisp packets, pavement plants, or weeds, as some people refer to them. And those outcomes from those materials can be video, sound pieces, installations, performance props. So it just really varies, but they're used as a metaphor to question what humanity values, kind of in reference to each other and the non-human communities. So yeah, I use this as a starting point to talk about environmental crises. I collect the materials on walks, and that's a big part of my practice, is finding these materials. So it might be walks around my studio, out in nature. I also live on a boat, and I don't have a fixed mooring, so I move every 2 weeks. So I end up moving through abandoned spaces, industrial spaces, in the middle of London, where the canal is this kind of corridor for nature and a place to escape to. So finding those materials and where they're from is very important, and as is place. And yeah. So this is the piece you can see is Winter Blues in the forest. So over the pandemic, I started to think about taking my work outside a lot more. So rather than collecting these materials and then taking them back to my studio or exhibit them in a gallery or as a performance, I started to spend more time documenting and being more in these spaces. And I was also thinking a lot about my practice, and I'm talking about our disconnection to nature, all these issues, and should I be more immersed? I also work with, more immersed in these spaces, and would they work? Would they be read easier? Would it be more relevant to show them like that? I also work with community groups, and a lot of my, there's lots of times when I go outside, and there's such a value of moving outside. I was also thinking about galleries and what they meant. I think a lot of people were over the pandemic. Who are they for? Who programs what? What happens inside them? Who can access them? What do they mean to our local communities? And just thinking about what outdoor spaces, how would they work in that same sort of role? I was successful with developing your creative practice, Arts Council funding, for a project which I'm calling Practicing Outside. So this project is me trying to work out how I can work more directly, and work with different people and collaborate more. And I guess the practical part of it is that I'm starting conversations with plants and trees, and seeing what that might look like, how that communication might work or might not. So since the summer, I've been working at Phytology, Bethnal Green Nature Reserve. So that's a nature reserve which has been protected by lots of the local community for many years. It's also a bomb site. It has a medicine garden, forest schools. People use it to come and research. So yeah, it's got this sort of rich community, human and non-communities there. So I wanted to be somewhere I could communicate with different people, and be in a space which I could see, just be in one space and see that change and get to really know it. So today I'm going to talk about two strands. I've been doing lots of things, but today I want to talk about some written text that I've been doing. So this is an image of the first thing that I played with. I want the experimentation that I'm doing to be collaborative. So I want the communication to be two-way. So just rather than plonking something down and then leaving it and taking a picture and that being that. I want it to be this ongoing conversation, and I want it to be collaborative in the sense that everything's can communicate back through it. And then, just kind of assessing that conversation. How do I record it? How is that framed? How do I interpret it? So this is made out of 2 kindling sacks, a green and red, sacks that hold wood for a fire. It's made out of plastic, and I've manipulated it and woven that text in there with the idea of things hopefully growing through in response to this question. And that question reads, how did we become so resilient? So I put it here because, this went down in August. So I thought there was a chance that maybe ivy would grow back through here. And, it's a question around resilience, and ivy is very resilient. I was thinking a lot about resilience, and that word was used a lot at the moment, and particularly around the pandemic and around, environmental crises, and just thinking about personal resilience and, is resilience necessarily a good thing? On a personal level, and also just thinking about humanity in wider terms of how we treat each other, how we treat human communities. So this is a test. It's an ongoing conversation. I also like the idea of putting these down in spring, where things would emerge through it. This is an image of it, just showing where it's installed or placed. This is a picture of it 3 weeks later. So it's covered in pigeon feathers, autumn leaves, fox poo. There's ivy and other plants beginning to grow back through. I wasn't sure what would happen. I wasn't sure if it would get taken away, or a fox or squirrel would break through it, or you can see it's been manipulated, something sort of dug in there. So there was these predictions, but it was unknown what it would come back to. So I guess I'm kind of now thinking, what is that? How do I interpret that response to it? It's the human language, and I only have my human experience to sort of read back what I might, see here. So there's thinking about that limitation of using this written language, and just the unpredictability of what has happened, and how I interpret that response. I think on a practical level, there's a sparrowhawk apparently that visits the nature reserve. So maybe it got the pigeon, and then maybe a fox carried the rest of the body away, and the fox has made its territory on this bit of land that I've cleared for it, and these things have grown back. There's also plants growing that weren't there, so I guess by clearing that area, it's given light for other things to emerge that were underground. So it's an ongoing conversation. I'm just sort of thinking about what will happen next. Well, it will be covered in leaves, all the leaves that fall clear, and more an area so it's more light. Just sort of reading that and thinking about how I interpret it. Every time I go, I kind of try and make a note of what's happened, and I'm kind of writing a text piece that goes with it. It's very short, but just trying to sort of read it on a practical level and examine how I do that. So at the moment, I've written, we shat, we fought, they died, we ate, we stood in the rain, and we grew, and the leaves did fall. So that's my interpretation of this response to the question, how did we become so resilient? I've also put this one up. Again, it's kindling sacks. This one reads, how did we learn to let go? It's placed between trees. It was just before autumn, with the idea that it might collect autumn leaves, and me asking these trees, how did they learn to let go? and also, it's a question read by the human community. It's placed in a area near some ponds, which just recently were dug up, and then a bigger one was installed to allow for more sort of diversity, because those ponds have been there for quite a few years. So there's been lots of disruption there to what the community's used to. So it's a question to them as well. How did we learn to let go during this sort of change? So again, this is an ongoing conversation. I will see what will happen. Will leaves collect in it? It didn't collect as I first, assumed it would, because the air can blow back at the bottom and blow them out. But then since then a branch has fallen and leaves are starting to collect in the corner. So it's just sort of me learning to let go, I guess, and seeing how that will work. I can also change the shape of the netting. I spread it out as much as I dared, with it still allowing it to collect some leaves. I can change that. So it's me sort of thinking, shall I leave that? Shall I manipulate that? This is sort of ongoing two-way conversation. I've also seen birds sort of standing on it as well. This is a picture of what it looks like. So these two pieces were a starting point, I guess, they were my questions. And as I was getting to know the space, I've also been talking to people about these pieces and the limitations of it, using this human, in this case, English, written language. I'm also I've been doing some recordings of talking to different things in the reserve as well. But in this sense that they're written, and does anything around them understand them? What is the limitations of that? How do I read that response? And I feel like there is a limitation in the sense that perhaps I believe that trees and plants can't read this, but that's generated lots of conversations with the human community that visit there, and people that I've shown these to, just in the sense of, well, what does that mean to the tree or plant? And then we've discussed what that might mean, and trying to work out how these other beings would interpret this if they could. So I've been collecting questions from other people at the nature reserve and other people generally, asking them if they could talk to plants and trees, what would they ask them? So I've got over 100 or so questions. It's just an example of some of them. So some of them are you more proud of your root system or your foliage? How do you know how to be the shape that you are? How do you prepare for death? What did you have for breakfast? Do you feel welcome? So yeah, they're very playful. All of them are human-centric. I guess they're coming from our experience, but lots of them are, limited in the sense of language and our interpretation of our experience. They're framed from our experience. So, what did you have for breakfast? It's very. How do we answer that? So, the person that gave me that question, there's been this sort of assessing or addressing this limitation. So, and then trying to answer it. So it's created this sort of rich conversations of, well, what is breakfast to a tree? Is it eating light, or what does and then trying to put it to what we know in a practical sense, in the sense of science, and interpreting it that way. Or it's the answers are very poetic, but they're creating more questions, and also bringing up discussions around our relationship with the non-human, and what these conversations would look like, and what these conversations raise, particularly like this, do you feel welcome, and how that reflects back in the human community and the conversations we're having amongst ourselves about our relationships with each other. So there's lots of things I might do with these questions. This is ongoing. One of the things I would like to do is turn this into a group sort of participatory performance, which would be outside. I've been putting these into a video which I've been projecting with a handheld projector back onto the non-human, onto trees, onto plants, onto leaves, and playing around with how that might look. So one thing with these questions, I'm working on a project called Projection, where it would be, these questions would be projected onto, for example, a tree, and then they would be read out as a group. So I can show you an example of that, what that might look like. So there would be these individual questions that I've collected from all these people would be then read out together individually to create this sort of one voice, and read out to these other communities that would be there to listen, for example, trees, plants. And then there'll be gaps in between these questions for people to sort of listen to the responses and be with each other in that silence. So I'm going to show you an example of what that might look like. So this is an example. This isn't actually a video piece. It's just how it this is without reading it out, but just a visual example of it. That was shot just before dusk. So it's just to show what that might look like. That would be read out. There would be silences in between, and it feels to me, as it's projected with this, this projector, that it's almost being performed back by what the light is hitting. So there, it hit the tree. Here it's hitting. This is projected larger onto the autumn leaves. So the texture and the text is completely changed by what the light hits, and it feels like that object is responding somehow. So that object becomes part of the question. So yeah, that just gives an example of how it could be visually seen. It can be projected. Really, it's very big there. Actually, it's just to show different examples. It's hard to kind of document it because there's this sort of small frame of time between when you can see the projection and you can still see the background. But as soon as it becomes dark, it's this immersive experience. It can be projected very big and can be almost monumental. So I really like this idea of these questions being projected back in this form and being together as humans together, reading those out, thinking about what they mean to all the communities around us, to each other, having those silences in between, being together. And then I think there would be at the end of those questions being read out, there would be time, 5 or 10 minutes, just to sit again in silence and just sort of receive the response back from everything around us, and just to be sitting with each other with those questions, which again, I think they could be, as much as they've been asked for trees and, directed at trees and plants, they're also very relevant to each other. And yeah, again, as I said, just sort of thinking about the limitations of that and what it brings up, and what do we know about the plants and trees around us, and how they could interpret this. If they could, what would it look like in the sense of science of what we know, or even poetically? So they're the questions I've been collecting from other people. There are a couple of mine in there as well, but I've also been thinking about what my questions would be, a bit more personal, I guess, and directly when it's just me out there at dusk playing around with this projector, trying to have these conversations. So I'm really trying to make that a bit more, yeah, about me being there and listening and seeing how that conversation might go, and what it might like be on a more one-to-one. So these are some of the questions I've been asking. There's 2 or 3 here. And just thinking about how we go into nature as a sort of refuge to reflect. Well, I do anyway. And this, we go there, and with all these questions, or, maybe we're troubled and we go there to clear our head, and we have all these questions and these thoughts in our minds. And then when I go into nature, the response I get, it isn't this dialogue that's going on inside my head. It's sort of this unspoken, like this conversation, or how I reflect, or how my head is cleared by immersing myself in nature, doesn't involve this thought process. It's this relationship and this communication, which is something other. So in this piece, which might be a video, it might be a performance, I'm moving around with that projector and seeing how the text I have, the thoughts that I have, and the light that I'm projecting from my human made projector, are how these questions are broken up, how they're interpreted, what they look like once I'm outside. So I'm just really enjoying how that text is broken, how this human written language isn't, in this case English language, isn't recognizable, isn't readable as far as I know, in that sense, and it literally has been broken up by nature. It really, at times it can't be interpreted anymore, and there's this sort of play between it being readable and not being readable. And again, how this light is shone onto the surface and highlights what's there. There's this darkness, and then this light highlights these beings and colours and textures. And again, it feels like the questions are being reflected back. And then my questions, are they to myself? Are they to nature? Is this human-centric? Is that, I mean, it's definitely human-centric, but are they being asked, reflected back from what's around me? I guess is this sort of letting go of my very human-centric questions, and they're broken up into something else, and it turns into this experience of me being there. So that might come as an outcome, that might be a performance, or it might just be documentations of these conversations that I'm having. So the sound is just recorded by the camera. I've also got separate recordings of this, so it could be better quality. But I think I'll probably use this with the sound of what's happening in Bethnal Green Nature Reserve. I mean, it's Bethnal Green. It's very noisy, but there's also these sounds of dusk and what's happening in the nature reserve. So I quite like that conflict, and also that conflict of materials as well. With these trees and then this light coming from the projector. So yeah, that's what I'm working on at the moment. Okay, yeah, thank you.